And so, as some of you may know, our organization focuses on this all day, every day, all year round. But we always like it when there is a specific focus. And so we're going to be talking about how to support your mental health using neuroscience and the latest research around what we know regarding workplace mental health. And I'm going to give you 4 steps that have been scientifically proven to make a difference and help foster and create a healthier workplace, even if you feel like maybe the leadership around you, maybe your peers aren't necessarily on board. There are things that you can do right now that will help improve your mental health and protect your mental health moving forward. So one of the questions I like to ask people is to think about when they've done their best work. Because not what time of day, but think about a time in your career, a time when you, throughout your work life, when you've done your best work. And if anybody could just put something in the chat, I'd love to see some input from our folks who've joined us around when do you think you've done your best work? When was it? Describe that team, that leader, that situation that you were in. And while we're waiting for some of you to share, I'll say many of the comments I get tend to be around when I felt supported, when I felt valued, when I felt empowered to make decisions that impacted me. So anybody want to add to that? Give that a minute here in the chat. Yeah, everyone pitched in. Thank you, Pat. Everyone pitched in to help everyone else when they were needed. Actually, I'm going to come back to that because that's actually one of the tactics for creating a healthy, psychologically healthy workplace. So a little bit about our organization. I'm the CEO. My name is Dr. Alessandria Polizzi. We're called Verdant Consulting. We focus on workplace mental health and building skills and competencies that help move that forward. We help organizations implement the World Health Organization's global guidelines for workplace mental health, as well as the standards from ISO 45003. I'm also the global liaison for ISO, bridging between occupational health and safety and human resources. And so that is what we do. And we're fortunate to do that with partners from around the globe who are our affiliates. We have almost 100 affiliates around the globe as well. Okay, so what we're going to focus on over our time together is going to be on why we get overwhelmed. So this is going to be a little bit of the brain science. We're going to talk about how courage, and not courage from you, but creating courage can help create a psychologically healthy and functioning organization. And then I'm going to teach you 4 things that you can do right now that will make a difference in your work life and be an investment in the future to help protect and support your mental health.
Right. No, I know. It's finding the
Okay, I've
balance
got
between
to
having
mute
information.
our new guest who just joined.
that you're
Oh, there we go. All right, so question to the group, can we become stress-free? If you think we can become stress-free, yes or no, Y or N in the chat. What do we think? No, says Pat. Anyone else? Often we talk about, I've heard the terms, chief happiness officer, or we try to get, we're trying to gain happiness. And the thing is that as humans, we evolved for 200,000 years in order to stay safe, not happy. And so if you think about the evolution of our brains, the situations we find ourselves in now are relatively new when you look at the full evolutionary cycle of our brains, because our brains evolved to keep us safe and not necessarily happy. And one of the tools that we used in order to stay safe was, you guessed it, stress, right? Because when we feel stressed or we're aware of things that can threaten us, we are more likely to be safe. So would love to hear from anybody. Why do you think we need stress? What benefit does stress provide to us? Feel free to add that to the chat. So you may think, okay, there's nothing positive to stress, but there's plenty of things that come from being stressed, like our increased awareness. We get an increase of adrenaline, which helps us get that speed to run away and keep us safe. When we're not overwhelmed by it, thank you again, Pat, it helps us keep focused. Actually gives us a small burst of immunity, not for the long haul. As we know, it's very unhealthy to be stressed for long periods of time, but stress keeps us kind of on point and focused. And there's a difference between anxiety. If you think about anxiety is, we see that thing that may happen in the distance, so we're keeping an eye out for it. But then another response is when the thing is right in our face, and that's when fear comes up. So we have these kind of anxiety and fear responses that come up even at work. And I love this Mark Twain quote where he says, I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which have actually happened, because our brains are on constant alert for those threats. Again, think about the purpose of the brain, the purpose of stress, anxiety, and fear is to keep us safe. So, have you ever worried or stressed about something that hasn't happened? If that's something that's happened with you, go ahead and put a Y in the chat. Anybody here ever worried or stressed about something that ended up not happening? Thanks again, Pat. Yes, so many of us will spend time worrying about things that never happen. In fact, research shows that of the things that we worry about, 85% of them never happen. Yes, thank you, Jamie. So of the things we worry about, 85% of those things never happen. Does anybody want to guess for the things that do happen, what percent are actually as bad as we thought they'd be? Put your guess in the chat. Is it 50%? Is it 100%? Because we're really good at reading the future. What percent of things are as bad as we thought they might be? 25% says Pat. Any other guesses? The answer is 80% weren't as bad as we thought they'd be. So we're worrying about many things that don't happen. And even when they do happen, they aren't as bad as we thought. And so there's this book called The Worry Cure that talks about why we always focus on worry. One of the things about our brains is that our brains are really wired to focus on the negative. You think about the negative as Velcro and the positive as Teflon. So our brains tend to stick to those negative thoughts or negative experiences as well. So why would we worry? Why do we worry? And there's lots of things not logical. We don't do it on purpose per se, but we try to suppress our feelings or prepare for the feelings we'll have. Lack of knowledge is very off-putting for us as humans. Sometimes when we worry about things, we have the misguided belief that we will then be able to control the outcome. I'm going to talk about control later. Sometimes we think if I worry about something, then it won't really be true. And some people just identify as being a worrier. That's just who I am. That's just what I do. And so this can be a huge distraction, especially since not much of it ever happens. And one of the insights about our brain, again, so we call this session using brain science. One of the insights about our brain is that our brain often doesn't know the difference between what's really happened or what we've imagined to be happening. And so this was a research study that was done about 20 years ago that compared brain scans of a control group, a group that did a physical practice of just flexing their fingers, and then a group that thought about flexing their fingers. And what you can see is that the group that thought about doing the activity had about the same brain patterns as the group that was actually doing it. And so we know that our brains, they experience things, and we will have a physical manifestation as if they're actually happening. Another example recently that came up was that cyber attacks, folks who are responsible for protecting their organization through a cyber attack, which we saw the recent one in Las Vegas. I don't even know if it's done yet. They would have the same post-traumatic stress symptoms as somebody who had been actually under a physical attack. Because again, our brain evolved for 200,000 years where the physical was the only manifestation of stress. And so, or the biggest one. And so that feeling that it's happening versus it actually happening is a very fine line for our brains. And we also know, as we've probably learned through our unconscious bias training or other training, that what we believe, we tend to see. And so those pre-wired notions that we have of the world impact how we interpret data as it comes in. And those biases are not just external, they're also internal. So we have this thing called self-verification, where the thing we believe to be true about ourselves, we tend to focus on data, not consciously, but subconsciously, unconsciously. That proves that to be true. So I like to share with folks about all the different ways that we have what are called cognitive distortions or biases, ways that our view of the world and of ourselves tends to be skewed because our brain is still operating in that protective mode.
Another Martin Minute. Today we are talking about thinking traps. Thinking traps are patterns of thought that are often inaccurate, negatively biased, and make us feel terribly about ourselves. I deal with these thoughts by challenging them through questions. So, question, tell me what you think about me. No, that's not one of the questions. But the question is, 1, is this thought helpful? Some things are true, but they're unhelpful to ruminate on. So it's going to make you feel bad about yourself. Is this under my control? Also, what evidence is there that this will actually happen? Am I 100% sure that it will happen? If it is, plan for the best and worst case scenario, so at least you feel prepared to deal with it if it occurs. Am I blaming myself unnecessarily? What would I say to a friend? Sometimes it's easier to be kind to a friend than to ourselves, which is unfortunate, but it is true. Am I thinking in absolutes? Are you using statements such as always or never? The only thing that I am always is black. So if I'm using always or never, I'm exaggerating. Also, is this fact or opinion? If it's fact, I can look it up. Webster says it. If it's not, it's probably my opinion.
So she went through several thinking traps there. I highly recommend following her, by the way. But here are the ones that the questions to ask yourself to see if you're in a thinking trap. It's called a thinking trap, which are these thought patterns that we tend to have, pretty common, that can derail us or would tell us that I maybe need to get a new perspective or at least explore alternative perspectives. And she talked about some of those in that very short video. But there are specific biases that tend to come up pretty frequently for us at work. One of them is perfectionism. So that's the expectation that we will make 0 mistakes. Curious from the group, how many mistakes on average do you think the average adult makes in one day? Any guesses? Go ahead and put those in the chat. Just in a 24-hour period, how many mistakes do we make? These can be little ones like calling someone by the wrong name or switching things around. So Pat is going bold with the 200. So on average, we make about 55 mistakes a day. Depends on what we're doing. If we're doing something new, maybe we are going to be at 200 or more. But we tend to make mistakes pretty frequently. And it's actually one of the best ways for us to learn is by making mistakes. So perfectionism and the expectation of making 0 mistakes is an unrealistic expectation, which will result in disappointment, whether or not we're being a perfectionist about ourselves or about other people. Overgeneralization is another one. This is where we tend to see a bigger pattern based on just one single event. So someone said something to me that I didn't appreciate, or somebody said something that made me feel a certain way, and therefore they will always do that. And so we make these overgeneralizations. Another one is fortune telling. Think about that worrying data point we saw. The belief that we can tell what will happen in the future. We may be able to make an assumption about what will happen in the future, but we absolutely cannot be 100% sure of what will happen in the future. You just never know what's going to happen. And so jumping to conclusions based on what we assume will happen, that's a bias or cognitive distortion. And then here's one of my personal favorites, which is something called metacognition, which is having a feeling about having a feeling. For those of us at work or who have to be in a professional, put on a professional brand, we have to show up in a professional way. When we have feelings or emotions in reaction to things that happen, we might feel like that's a failure to have the feelings because we've been so ingrained to believe that we don't have feelings at work, which is completely untrue and impossible. As humans, we evolved with feelings in order to stay alive. And so we can't turn that off. We just have the one brain that comes with all the, I call it the gift with purchase. We are feeling creatures who also happen to think. And so these are some biases that we should keep an eye out for. Are there any others that folks know that they'd like to share in the chat? Please do. There's actually over 200 potential biases. Now, most of us don't have all of these. Most of us have just, our special few, but there is a full catalog, a codex of all the different ways in which we adjust what we see, we make assumptions, we jump to conclusions, we avoid, we try to process a lot of information in a short amount of time, and that can lead to some of these biases. So if you're thinking you don't have them, yeah, you're probably wrong. Are any of these familiar to the group? Anyone here experience these? If you do, put an exclamation point for me in the chat. I'd like to see my fellow perfectionists. Just because you're a perfectionist doesn't mean you don't make a lot of mistakes like this person. Thank you, Jamie. Yes, so these are something for us to keep an eye out. Again, using brain science, we know how our brains are wired, how they work, and how they respond when we're under stress. So one of the things we've been told over and over again, and that I am trying to debunk and remove from our vocabulary and way of thinking about work, is that work is not personal, it's business. The other thing we've been told is you can leave that at the door. You shut all of those emotions off. The thing is, we can't have thoughts without the emotions that come from them. That's the cognitive behavior theory, right? We have thoughts, drives emotions, drives behavior. So we need emotion to get work done, and including motivation and emotion around the thrill of getting something done or having a positive response. Those are emotions that we want to use at work. Emotions sometimes are like anger, because we want to really push for a thing that needs to happen, or advocacy, or unfortunately fear. And so there's been a lot of research around the workplace and workplace mental health. The WHO last year in September published their global guidelines. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a leader or in any kind of space where you can influence your organization to invest in the workplace mental health and the health and safety of your employees. Our own Surgeon General published this shortly thereafter, so almost exactly a year ago, October 2022. And so they focused on, again, the full breadth of workplace mental health and well-being. So they have other pieces in there as well as mental health. But you can see here the data points around the impact that work has on our mental health and that our mental health can have on work. So this is a quote from the Surgeon General, which is, meaningful work is actually protective to our mental health. In other words, being mentally healthy, psychologically healthy doesn't mean you have no work to do. Again, as we've evolved, we are beings who like to accomplish things. Burnout is a threat to our mental health, but even more so is something called bore out. And that is when we don't have meaningful work, when we're doing things or not doing things that challenge us. So we need those challenges to stay healthy, to stay engaged. However, poor working conditions and known hazards that we are well documented can help to deteriorate our mental health. I'm curious from the group, why would that be? How is it that work could have such a strong impact on our mental health? Any thoughts? Please add those to the chat. Well, I'm waiting for anybody to add theirs. Some ways that we can find that our mental health can be impacted. Yes, because of accomplishing things. Yes, thank you, Jamie. But the fear of losing your job, right? The fear of public or social shame of losing your job. The stress of self-esteem, not being given enough time to do work well, and then having to put out poor quality work. That can make us feel badly about ourselves. So there's plenty of ways in which work can help deteriorate or can create psychosocial harm to our mental health. So a couple more chances for us to participate here. A UKG earlier, actually that was this year, had a study that looked at the impact of mental health of our managers, our supervisors on our mental health. And so they looked at our therapists, our doctors, our spouses, and our supervisors or managers. What percent do you think does our manager have? What percent of impact does our manager have on our mental health? And I'll give you a quick clue. It's the same as one of these three. So any guesses as to what level of impact our manager has on our mental health? Is it the same as our therapists, our doctors, or our spouses or significant others? Curious what the group thinks. Yep. Thank you, Jamie. 69%. In fact, that is true. Our managers have the same level of impact to our mental health as our significant others. So our work life and our home life mirror each other in the impact that has on our mental health. And given that most of us spend about 80% of our adult lives working, that makes a ton of sense. However, in addition to this, there is a big disconnect currently between what executives see as healthy workplaces and what employees see as healthy workplaces. Now, for those of you who have gone through the whole return to office, or my favorite, return to work as if no one was working before process, there's a big disconnect there as well for employees. We've shown that we can work remotely and be highly productive. Many companies are having unprecedented success, and yet there's this belief that, not based on data, that we do better when we're in these confined spaces. You can see this just came from Deloitte a couple months ago, or maybe last month even, that showed that from an executive perspective, almost 90% of them believe that mental health has improved for our employees, but that is not the case. About 40% believe that it has improved. So there's still 60% of us who see that our mental health is not getting better, but there seems to be a disconnect at the top. And so that's why I want to talk about what we can do as individuals within the organization to help empower us to make a difference in our own mental health, so that we don't have to wait for others to buy in, right? We don't have to be passive in this. So what can one person do? So I've done a ton of research on, how do we create healthy and safe workplaces, obviously. And one of the areas I really wanted to understand is, do we have to wait until those in power agree that this is a problem? And what can we do for ourselves, short of quitting jobs, which if you need to, you need to, but some of us can't afford to do that. So what can we do in the meantime? And so this research study showed that by building courage, creating a culture of courage, we are able to invest in creating a great foundation and fostering a space where we can have healthier and safer workplaces. And so this study from Tavistock Institute, and there were a couple of others as well, but I used that one particularly, identified 4 areas that we can do that will help to foster a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. So while we know that work has a big impact on our mental health, and we may not necessarily have the support that we would desire for our workplaces, or until they hire a company like us to come and help build the workplace mental health. In the interim, these are 4 specific things that you can do right now that will help create that space for you to at least have the building blocks to be protective to your mental health. So I'm going to talk about this in more detail here. These aren't exhaustive. There are other things you can do to help with your mental health. One of them is understanding what your values are, and the other's boundaries. So there are other things you can do specifically for you that we'll also discuss at the end. But this is what we need to do now to invest in creating that healthy workplace. And you can see here, the biggest area of impact is in when we have opportunities to collaborate with other people. And so I'll talk about that in more detail as we continue to go through these 4 areas. So why would courage be important? Again, this isn't about us being more courageous. It's about us creating a culture of courage, a place in which people can do these things, right? Where I can not be afraid of failure. I can have a contradicting opinion. I can ask questions, admit to mistakes. Does anybody know another term for these 6 things? Hint, Google had a project called Project Aristotle in 2015, where they identified this as the differentiator between high-performing business or teams and those who are not. Very popular term. Anyone want to take a guess? Culture. Okay. Yes. Well, what type of culture? It is a psychologically safe culture. So Project Aristotle at Google, they looked at teams, those that performed really well, those that did not, and they identified these 6 behaviors, which we now call psychologically safe behaviors, that differentiate those teams. And so you can see here the behavior comes from also investing in creating a culture of courage. So when we create the space for people to be courageous, then we can have psychologically safe behaviors, and that's where we start to really get that flywheel of culture, high performance, and healthier and safer workplaces. Does that mean they're conflict and stress-free? Absolutely not. That just means they're healthier based on what we as humans need in order to do our best work. And so let's continue to talk about the actions we can take to build that courage. So the first one is to find connection. So this is where we can have a shared mission. This is really, having a shared mission is really important, or a shared sense of purpose for your organization. This is that connection that makes sure that we're all tied together in both feeling included and feeling like we belong to that organization, and that our role is an important part of achieving that collective goal. So sharing your goals as an organization, making sure that you are very clear about your mission and your purpose. And it's not just something you put on your website. It is how we define the work we do, and everyone knows how their part plays into the overall mission and purpose of the organization. So a question so another study that looked at that, having a shared vision. In this study, they looked at the impact that had on team performance, which improved by 57%, and on the outcomes, which is client satisfaction, which was higher, 51% higher, when we had shared vision. Okay, so having that shared vision, being united around a common mission, it may seem like, oh, well, we all know why we're doing what we're doing, but we need to constantly be reminded. Again, that helps us create that sense of courage, because I'm going to speak up if I know we're all working toward the same goal. If I feel like we're working at cross purposes, or we're not all focused on the same mission, I'm going to be less likely to speak up, and that's going to be more stressful. So one thing to ask yourself is, how often are you able to be connected to that vision? Do you understand how your role fits with the broader picture? And if not, this is a great place for you to get that connection that will help give you more of that courage and confidence to be able to have those psychologically safe behaviors. So if you don't know the answer to this, go out and find it, and make sure that you're constantly reconnecting to that mission and vision and purpose. All right, the next one is to really understand people at a human level. This is that building those relationships. At Gallup, they call it having a best friend at work, which, I don't know about best friend, but definitely having people that you trust. But in a hybrid workplace, you may say, okay, well, I can't really build those relationships because we're so distant. But here's a couple of things that you can do. Number one, you're in my home right now, right? So think about that. How often are we in the homes of our coworkers? We never would have done that unless we were really good friends who got invited over on the weekend. So we have an opportunity to really get to know people personally. Ask questions. Be curious about the drawing on their wall. Oh, is that what is that in the background? Oh, you have a lot of bees, for example. What are those about? Get to know people at a personal level. If you feel like, oh, we're too busy, plot out specific time where you can share different quirky things, and they can be stupid, right? It can be your favorite ice cream. It can be, if you were going to get a tattoo in the next 10 minutes, what would it be of? No one has to get a tattoo. But so those kind of fun questions can really open up people, and you get to know them on a personal level. And again, that's that human to human contact. When we pretend like we're just machines or just a collection of ideas, we lose our humanity. And when we lose our humanity, it has a huge negative impact on our emotional and mental health. So ask the quirky question, find out more about each other. Another tip I have on this one is never ask one question, always ask two. When I know I'm just going to say, hey, how are you? And I'm not going to have a follow-up, chances are I might tune out, focus on the next thing, think about what I'm going to say. But if I know I'm going to be on the hook to ask a follow-up, I'm going to listen to those details. I'm going to become more curious. So push yourself to try being the double questioner and not just the one at the surface. Be purposeful in creating those personal connections. So some things to avoid in doing this. Don't use the excuse of being too busy. You can always take 30 seconds to talk to another human being. Try to avoid those surface level conversations. Yes, it was a great game between the Cowboys and the 49ers or whatever. But, you know, let's go beyond the sports and the weather. Let's go a little deeper. If you're somebody who tends to overshare or over dominate, be aware of that. Step back, be more questions and statements. And don't assume that you already know people. Even if you've worked with them for years and years and years, there's always something new for you to learn. So here are some things that I suggest you try. Some of these I've already covered. Make sure you block the time, even if it's the first 2 minutes of a meeting for get to know you time. That's time well invested. Again, we're making investments in our bank to create a healthy workplace, right? So these are just small deposits. Look for shared interests. Change your perspective. Wonder what people might want to know about you. Be creative with the questions that you ask. If you feel like that's outside of your skill set, what a great opportunity to use something like AI to come up with a list of 15, 25 questions that will help you get to know people better at work. And AI, I'm sure, will be glad to provide that to you. One thing I want you to think about right now, though, is there someone on your team who you either don't know much about, that you haven't had a chance to talk to very much? Maybe they started during COVID and you've been remote most of the time. Or maybe there's someone who maybe you've lost touch with or you find really difficult to work with. That last one is particularly important. When you're not in conflict, try to spend some time getting to know who that person is and how they tick. It's amazing what can happen when we make those connections. And as humans, that's how we evolved. We evolved in community, not as independent boxes with faces. All right, collaboration. If you can remember from the survey, this was the highest correlation to having those psychologically healthy behaviors. So find opportunities to collaborate with people. Find opportunities to build those shared stories. Leverage the strengths of others on your team, your peers, maybe a mentor. Create a shared history with the people that you work with. When we collaborate, we are able to build trust and shared stories with each other. And that is really where that fabric of trust and psychological health and safety starts to become stronger. In fact, this research study looked at when folks had more collaboration, it increased trust, overall employee job satisfaction, and innovation and creativity. I'm going to ask a question. Why do you think being collaborative helps increase innovation? Put your thoughts in the chat. And while you do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about trust, because sometimes people will think, oh, psychologically healthy workplaces are it's the same thing as trust. And it's not. Trust is absolutely a requirement, but trust is only one component. I can trust you to do what you say, live up to your expectations, but there are other things that can impact trust. I need to be a trusting individual, for example. And so maybe I have issues with trust, but I can trust you, but still not feel like I can ask questions, right? That psychological, healthy, and safe workplaces help us build on the foundation of trust. Absolutely. But that's not where we stop. We really want to build the healthy workplaces that have addressed the hazards that we know to be out there, as well as create that psychologically safe workplace. So any guesses on why innovation would improve with collaboration? Go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat. Are we getting shy? Yeah, more minds, more ideas. Thank you. Absolutely. More minds, more ideas. We bounce ideas off of each other. 2 + 2 equals 2 + 2 = 5, right? So we have an opportunity to have that diversity of thought when we collaborate. Thank you, Jamie. But think about this, collaboration isn't just about getting, it's also about giving. So what strengths do you have that you can share? What are the opportunities for you to help out others? And think about that again as making that investment. And speaking of which, our last one is support. So this is going outside of, our little box and thinking about who needs help right now. Who can I support? What resources can I share? Who needs to just hear that they've done a good job or to be told how much you appreciate them? Who needs to really leverage your strengths? Who can you build connection with and help provide support? And it may not be who you think it is. People are often very hesitant to ask for help. Even if you say, can I help you with anything? Normally the first answer is no. Curious from the group, why do you think that would be? Why would it be difficult for us to ask for help at work and in general, actually? But let's say both. Yeah, you don't want to bother someone. Some of us are afraid of looking weak. Some of us are afraid of, not feeling like we're going to show up as, having it all together. There's that. Those are some things that might hold us back. So what you have to do as an active, proactive person who's going to be building courage and building healthy workplaces is listen for the cues. Find people who may not look like they need help, but they can use it, right? People who complain about not having time to take a break or who are back to back to back to back. If you are in meeting after meeting after meeting, you need help. And if that's you you need to get help and get some support. Maybe someone can go to the meeting for, maybe somebody's already going to the meeting. You guys can swap. You're going to the same meetings. You don't have to all be there, right? People who are making mistakes, people who are forgetting things, people who are tardy with things. Look for those folks who seem to be struggling and don't ask necessarily if they need help, but also say, hey, I was noticing this and I'm wondering if it would be helpful if I would helped in this way. Often people are so in the weeds that they can't even think about how others could help them. They feel like having others help them is actually more work than just doing it themselves. And we don't want our friends to burn out. And when we, again, support each other, we show appreciation, we show gratitude, we're making that investment in the bank to create a healthy and safe workplace. So take a moment and think about, is there anybody in your sphere who could use your support? Maybe even if it's just, hey, I was in this session today and I was thinking about what a great job you did last week, last night, yesterday, doesn't matter. And wanted to say thank you, how much I appreciate this, that, or the other thing. These things never hurt. Never hurts to be told that you're appreciated. So I'm going to ask the group, if you're going to start one thing today, be it connecting with your mission and vision, being clear about that, finding someone to create those bonds with relationships, trying to find opportunities to collaborate and work with others, or reaching out and providing support. In the chat, which one of these would you commit to starting to help create a healthy and safe workplace? Oh, the asking 2 questions. Thanks, Jamie. So you're going to look for those opportunities to relate. Appreciate that. Yeah, starting the meeting, a random question. And you can actually have random question generator. There's all kinds of them out there that you can use. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, so these are things you can do to invest in the folks around you. I don't have a slide for this, but I want to add it since we have some time, which is some things that you can do for yourself right now if you're feeling overwhelmed at work. And it's just a few things. And I use the acronym of YMCA because it's easy for me to remember. But these are 4 things that you can do right now that will help you invest in your personal mental health and well-being. The first one with why is to really understand yourself. So earlier we talked about those biases. What are the biases we have for ourselves? What are the things that trigger us and make us anxious, right? What are those things that we worry about? Taking just 15 minutes a day can make a huge improvement in your overall 15 minutes a day. Sorry, doing what? Self-reflecting. So checking in with yourself. If I do that for 15 minutes a day, one study showed that after 10 days, they had a 23% improvement in their overall emotional well-being. So that's just doing the simple task of saying, how am I doing today? What's going on? What am I concerned about? What am I reacting to? Those kinds of questions. So that's so just take a few minutes just to check in with yourself. That can be huge. Second one is M for mindfulness. Now, this isn't meditation. This is taking a moment to just check in on how you're feeling. So being mindful and aware of your thoughts, feelings, that internal dialogue without judgment, and just acknowledging the thoughts or the feelings and letting them pass. So being mindful. The way I remember this one is the Chinese character for mindfulness is heart and now, the current present. So how am I feeling, thinking right now? So that's mindfulness. So we've got YM. Now C is compassion. That's self-compassion. Honestly, if all you did after this session was talk to yourself with kindness for the rest of the week, you would make a huge improvement in your emotional health. You'll help yourself cope with stresses more, and you're better able to work with others. So try talking to yourself like you would a close friend. Try self-compassion and being kind to yourself. That can be a huge improvement in your mental health. And then finally, we have A, which is acceptance. Now, this is a big one because for many of us, we try to control all the things. That's what our brains want to do in order to keep us safe. But when we understand, we have the wisdom to understand what we can and cannot control, then we know what we can let go of and what we need to take action on. And quite frankly, we try to control a lot more than we think than we can actually control. And so if that's something you'd like to work on, let me know. I have a list of things you may be trying to control that aren't controllable. That can be a great way to self-reflect on that. So that's my little extra is the YMCA. Focus on understanding yourself, your strengths, what stresses you out, your triggers, etc. And do that check-in with yourself. Mindfulness, compassion, and acceptance. So an additional 4. So I got 8 things today. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about micro-compassion. So this is about how do I give to others in order to foster the space for psychologically healthy and safe workplaces to grow and develop. And so here are 5 different ways in which we can practice, instead of microaggressions, micro-compassions, ways in which we can support other folks. Again, we are social creatures. What we know about our brains is that when we give to others, we benefit from a health perspective. So taking the time to create that common humanity and compassion with other folks. Of course, that feels that way. You're a human. Anyone would be. Connecting to the universal, very helpful way to be compassionate at a small level. Humility, opportunities to, share our flawed genius and one of our 50 mistakes we make every day. That humility makes us more approachable. It also makes it safer for others to share their experiences. Listening. Can you tell me more about that? That second question, right? Taking the moment to hear what other people are saying, really working on that active listening. Helping, we talked about helping, pitching in to help others. That's a micro compassion, right? It's a, hey, I know you have this big presentation. Do you want to look at each other's presentations so that we can both feel really good about it, or look for opportunities to make it even better? And then gratitude, honoring, really showing appreciation. Take the moment to tell people what you appreciate about them, even in the smallest things. So also practice those micro compassions for yourself. Okay. Take a moment to listen to yourself. Take a moment to be humble and understand you've overcome lots in your life. Be grateful, do something that's helpful for you, and find ways that you can connect with others.
There are all of these things which have brought us to a situation which is completely unsustainable. And what I think is that we are at the threshold of a really massive shift in, it's almost like an industrial revolution. For me, that we have to take psychosocial well-being seriously.
So while we're waiting for this to really start to gain traction and we can help create advocacy for our mental health at work, also make sure you're taking care of yourself so that you can continue to be healthy at work and do your best work. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone. I know there was some confusion about the Zoom, and I apologize for that. I will be sharing out the recording. Feel free to share it with others. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on TikTok as your HR Big Sister, or Dr. Al Polizzi. And with that, everyone, unless you have questions, thanks so much for joining me, and enjoy the rest of your day. Practice those micro compassions today for yourself. And happy World Mental Health Day.